We just went through a very large XRP sell-off, but the data we're getting behind the scenes might shock you. In this video, I want to talk about that as well as a pretty large problem for Bitcoin over the long run that I think a lot of people are ignoring. And guess what? It is the exact opposite for XRP. Like always, your support means so much to this channel. Thank you to everyone who takes the time to like these videos and subscribe to the channel. These two simple things really do help me out so much. Also, if you have any good place to buy some XRP, make sure to check out my favorite exchange uphold down in the description of this video. With that said, let's jump right into it, and I hope you guys enjoy the content. Over the past couple days, we have had a pretty large sell-off in the cryptocurrency market, and XRP specifically has gotten hit extra hard. Now, a lot of people are looking for specific reasons to why that has happened. You know, to me, it's just that XRP was up the most. It was up by far the highest percentage over the 7-day, and therefore had a more extreme pullback. That's just how these things work. If XRP is up 80% in a week, well, you can normally expect some level of retracement after the fact. You get a lot of extra fluff on top of a move like that. Now, a lot of people have been pointing to Chris Larsen selling some XRP, saying this is what caused the dump. Guys, it just really doesn't make any sense. If you go time some of Chris Larsen's sells up to the XRP price chart, there's been times it's gone up after he sells. There's been times it's gone down after he sells. So I don't really see any real correlation here. I know a lot of people are turning this into a FUD piece, but at the end of the day, we just had a Satoshi era wallet dump a whole bunch of Bitcoin. We have had miners dumping Bitcoin all throughout their time mining Bitcoin. Every single cryptocurrency gets bought and sold. That's just how these things work. And Chris Larsen is going to sell XRP throughout the rest of time. Everyone will take profits on XRP at some point, sell small portions, sell large portions. Doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, it's how the market absorbs this sell pressure that's really important. Now, this is the thing that almost no one is talking about, and I think it's just because it goes to a pro-XRP narrative rather than an anti-XRP narrative. But what we're seeing right now is there's actually large whale accumulation of XRP completely eating up this dip. Over 130 million XRP in the past 24 hours right after the dip. So guys, I don't think this has anything to do with Chris Larsen selling his XRP. What I think this is more likely is XRP, like I talked about earlier in the video, went on a huge rip because obviously it's got great fundamentals and a lot of people are realizing that. After that, you had a lot of people come in with leverage at the top and really try to get a couple extra percentages out of it. Large financial institutions, guys, they see this. They have all the indicators and they know what they need to get XRP to in order to get some liquidations, in order to scoop up some cheap XRP. Guess what? It's not a coincidence that XRP went down, that whale wallet started accumulating. That's just how this game works. They see an opportunity to get some cheap XRP, they crash the price and they purchase the cheap XRP. If you saw whale wallets dropping off a cliff, that would be something to be a little bit more concerned with. But the fact is they are eating up the dip and taking advantage of people panic selling their XRP at cheap prices. It's just part of the game. Now, with that said, I want to talk about something else that's a little bit on a different topic, and that's a huge difference between Bitcoin and XRP over the long run that I hadn't really ever thought about before. And that's when it comes down to the idea of what is a store of value and what provides utility. The other day, I was having a conversation with someone and they brought up an extremely interesting point, and this was a pro-Bitcoin person, funny enough. They were saying that Bitcoin as a store of value might not be all that bullish in comparison to what some people are saying. Why is that? Most store of values, people don't really talk that much about. People like talk about gold, but not your everyday person is using or talking about gold. It just sits around and does a whole lot of nothing. People don't want to transact with it. People don't want to move it. People don't want to utilize really the gold for much more than some niche use cases like jewelry. Now, I understand a lot of people wear gold jewelry, but just for this example, the vast majority of what happens with gold is for speculative purposes and as a store of value, not the jewelry market. The same could happen for Bitcoin, where Bitcoin pigeonholes itself into this niche sort of store of value, where a lot of people in the early days are holding Bitcoin, but there's not a real reason to hold Bitcoin as a store of value if you're late to the game or if you're looking for any kind of capital appreciation. The part where this gets very interesting is how Bitcoin is structured as a network. Bitcoin right now has mining, and if you mine, you contribute to consensus, or you just, for lack of or making it simple, power the Bitcoin network with mining. Right now, the miners are rewarded for bringing that compute power to the network via the block rewards or the halvings, or when all these people are rewarded with essentially free Bitcoin. Now, what's so interesting is eventually there won't be any more Bitcoin to distribute. All the Bitcoin issued by the protocol, the 21 million, will be given out. And at that point, the only way to reward miners is by people using the underlying network, people transacting, people moving Bitcoin around. If Bitcoin's pigeonholed into a store of value and everyone's just holding their Bitcoin and no one's spending it because it's a store of value that makes no sense to spend because they'd rather spend worthless dollars than spend Bitcoin, that's a huge problem on the Bitcoin thesis. Because if no one's moving Bitcoin, how are the miners going to get rewarded? And if miners aren't getting rewarded, why are they going to run these mining operations? There's not enough profit to actually pass around to these miners providing the compute power. A lot of people are going to choose not to do it because it's going to be an unprofitable business. This is one of the key reasons why I've always had a problem with the architecture of Bitcoin. Not that I don't think Bitcoin is going to be a valuable asset, but the entire consensus and the entire power of what is put into Bitcoin to make it what it is based on a reward mechanism. You are getting paid a reward based off the current architecture of Bitcoin. But the thing that's concerning is that architecture is going to change because there's not infinite free Bitcoin to give out. We're actually almost out of free Bitcoin to reward these miners with. And eventually, it's all going to come down to transaction volume. But if everyone's being told, store your Bitcoin, hold it, don't use it, then you're not going to have a lot of transaction volume. You're not going to have a lot of fees to pay the miners. And then you're compromising network security. Because the only way these miners are going to get paid to provide network security is if people are transacting on the network. If no one's transacting on the network, where are the fees going to come from in order to reward the miners? Most miners are just going to probably decide that they're not really wanting to do it anymore. This is very different than XRP. Why? Because the XRP ledger has inherent utility. There is a reason you would want to use the XRP ledger for its fast, cheap, and deep liquidity. When it comes down to the XRP ledger, there's no reward for participating in the security mechanism. You provide to the security mechanism of the XRP ledger because you want a healthy blockchain. If I'm a company utilizing the XRP ledger and I need the XRP ledger to be successful, I'm going to provide compute power because the XRP ledger itself being successful and a strong network into the future is my reward. But I'm not being artificially prompted to contribute my compute power to the network through a variable reward that might be going away like Bitcoin mining. Because the XRP ledger is positioned at a point of utility, people will have to use the XRP ledger, making it more of something that whether or not people see the value or not in holding XRP, they're utilizing the underlying XRP as liquidity on the network, but also encouraging them to maintain the health of the network for their own selfish needs. It's a very different way of looking at things, but could potentially be a big problem with Bitcoin moving forward. Now, I wanted to share this with you real quick just to show the utility. This is something that we have talked about on this channel multiple times, but it's starting to be picked up in mainstream media. And that's that the Federal Reserve Board of Atlanta actually talking about XRP as an international payment medium or wholesale settlement coin. Now, this just goes to show that these ideas of these things being possible are being thought of at the highest levels of the monetary system. Looking at XRP as something that could be a long-term utility cryptocurrency for settling trillions of dollars of transactions. These are the kinds of things that bring that utility to the XRP ledger. And it's not just some niche group of people thinking it's possible that one day this type of utility can come. This type of stuff is not talked about by Federal Reserve boards unless it's widely known that this is something that could potentially be coming in the future. What we're seeing is the XRP ledger is strategically positioned in this way that people are going to be forced to utilize XRP and forced to use XRP as liquidity, not only because they need to, but also because they might want to also hold it as a store of value and as an investment vehicle. There's all these different avenues for XRP to succeed, and none of it compromises the underlying security of the network like it does for Bitcoin. This is something that I'd never really thought about in terms of something being a store of value versus something having inherent utility. Bitcoin pitching itself into the store of value has long-term downsides for the health of the network. Where the XRP ledger, it doesn't really matter. Because you don't have this complex mining scenario and proof of work, it's super cheap and super efficient for the XRP ledger to operate. And therefore, it requires very minimal investment from any individual participant to maintain the health of the ledger. And the vast majority of people will have so much economic savings from using this new space age financial system that they'll be more than willing to reinvest some of those savings back into maintaining the health of the underlying network. This is a very important principle. But the idea that XRP Ledger is being positioned for utility rather than just store of value, one makes it inherently more important for people to interact with the XRP Ledger rather than their own preference in how they store value. But additionally, it opens the XRP Ledger up to long-term use cases that opens up more and more people to contribute to the security of the network rather than relying on something that's a variable that could be changing in the very near future. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed this update. And for now, Mickle out.